Good afternoon. I'd like to call this study session meeting of July 24th, 2024 to order. City Clerk, may we have roll call, please?
Councilmember Lamb. Here. Councilmember Gutierrez.
Here.
Councilmember Gregory. Mayor Pro Tem Ross. Mayor Carnevale.
Here. Mr. City Manager, are there any changes to the study session agenda?
I have no changes, Mayor.
Thank you. City Clerk, will you please read the statement of participation?
Public comment is the opportunity for members of the public to comment on items that are within the City Council's jurisdiction but not on the agenda. Because of restrictions contained in California law, the City Council may not discuss or act on any item not on the agenda, but may briefly respond to statements made or ask a question for clarification. The mayor may also request a brief response from staff to questions raised during public comment or request that a matter be agendized for a future meeting. Public comment will be limited to 3 minutes. If you are a member of the public and you wish to address the City Council, please complete a request to speak form available at the entrance and submit it to the City Clerk. You will be called upon at the appropriate time. If you have materials or other items to present to the members of the City Council, please do not approach them. All materials shall be presented to the City Clerk for distribution. I do have a couple of individuals that would like to provide public comment. The first one is Steve Vogelson.
Good afternoon, Council. This is Steve Obasang. I've been in Cathedral City for only 39 years. The last time I spoke, I brought up the fact about feral cats in our neighborhood. And at that time, just around in my house, it was about 18 to 20 cats. I guess lucky for me with this heat, a lot of them are gone. In fact, one of them died right next to my trash cans. And since we don't have animal control, Thousand Palms had to come, and they took a day to get there to do that. That's one of the things. The other thing is taxes. The taxes here in Cathedral City are pretty high, especially the sales tax, probably the highest in Coachella Valley. Also, I keep noticing on my bills, utility bills, there's a tax for Cathedral City, which I don't see how you guys supposedly rank to get any kind of money from our utilities. We're already out overpaying for that as well. You might be having problems finding what to do with the money you get, but what I can see, it could be mismanagement. I don't know. I might have to check on that. The other thing I responded to at one time was the excess water, especially at 30th and La Vista. There's like 2 drains, at least looks like drains, and they're always full of water. And naturally, where I am, they don't have the curbs, but anyways, there's no sewer line where it goes to, and it just sits there, which is a nice mosquito trap. I brought that up at one time too, and they told me that somebody would get back to me. The guy came and got my number, but no one ever got back to me. So I'm just wondering, if it even matters coming here, if the council cares about the citizens or their concerns. It's pretty bad. And one of the last things is the traffic. I think there should be a traffic light either on Tachiva or Tortuga to stop the fast flow on Date Palm, because sometimes that's a real pain to get out from there and people are really speeding. And one thing to do, at least on Tortuga, is either put speed bumps or maybe have the police, like I suggested before, giving traffic tickets. You guys could make a mint, because that's a thoroughfare all the way down to Landau, and they're going between 30 and 48 miles an hour every stinking day. And it's just ridiculous. So I guess if you could have somebody get back to me on some of these items.
Thank you, Steve. I will pass that on to the city manager for your concerns.
All right, thanks.
Thank you, sir.
And Steve, if you leave your address, I'll give the mosquito and vector control.
Okay.
The next speaker is Robert McCormick.
Good evening, Mayor, City Council. This time what I want to talk about is my protesting on San Jacinto and Cathedral Canyon back before my car got impounded. And apparently the homeowners didn't like me saying thank you, and I would cite the make of the model of the car, and for instance, thank you Ford Taurus, whatever, and thank the people for supporting my campaigning for a presidential candidate. My understanding is, per the Constitution, there is no more important right of a citizen than when they are campaigning for a president. And nothing is supposed to interfere with that activity. Whether it be a homeowner not liking the protest or anybody else, as far as I know, even murder. If somebody had murdered somebody and there was going to be an arrest warrant, my understanding is if the police go in, they have to be extremely fragile and extremely sensitive when it comes to campaigning for a presidential candidate. I have been campaigning for Biden since last July. My window on the back of my vehicle said, papers, please, Biden or Kamala Harris, referring to the Third Reich and Hitler, which obviously is a campaign for a presidential candidate, and yet my car was impounded. And as I said, as far as I know, police are not supposed to interfere when somebody is campaigning for a presidential candidate whatsoever. 6 cop cars came, and they tried to tell me that I need to shut up and that I need to hold my voice down. And I told them, you don't tell the airplanes to shut up. You don't tell jackhammers to shut up. You don't tell the trash truck to shut up. Curfew is between 6 a.m. and 10 p.m. for everybody. I could have a boombox here, I told them, and blast it. You couldn't tell me to hold it down. They ended up leaving. But it is one more, as I believe, quid pro quo into the pockets of Emmanuel Perez, Chad Bianca, Cathedral City Police Chief, of hundreds of thousands of dollars into their pockets and bank accounts.
Sir, we greatly appreciate what you have to say, but you only get 3 minutes, and I do hate to cut you off, but thank you very much.
Okay.
Do appreciate you.
Okay.
Thank you. City Clerk, can you?
I don't have any other request to speak forms at this time, but if you're a member of the public and you wish to provide public comment, please raise your hand. And I see no hands raised, Mayor.
Thank you. Then we're going to move on to study session, item A, IT Master Plan. Mr. City Manager, do we have a staff report?
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. Jan de Guzman, our Chief Technology Officer, will introduce our speakers. As you know, we contracted for an IT master plan about a year ago. We now have the report, and they will be going over the findings, which we will use to guide us through the upcoming budget discussions and what we need to fund. Jan?
Yes, Jan de Guzman, Chief Technology Officer. Just a background on the IT master plan. In August 2022, the council approved a contract with Client First to do a citywide technology assessment and to produce an IT master plan. So I have Client First. They will do the presentation. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mayor and council members. Appreciate the opportunity to be here and talk with you today and answer any questions you have. My name is David Kraut. This is Tom Jacobson, and we'll use the slide deck to guide our discussion. So just as for about a minute and a half, Client First, I'm one of the partners here. I've been doing this for 27 years. I've worked with city governments for about 25 years. Worked actually with over 140 agencies. Tom Jacobson, my senior. He's been around longer than I have, but we just had our 20th anniversary of our company serving local governments in California throughout the United States. We're going to make a couple more points about us, and then we're going to talk about what the objective of this master plan was. I'm going to make some key comments about the methodology, and then we'll summarize some of our assessment findings. Did it go somewhere?
Go. It switched.
Yeah,
Sorry.
this happens to us way too often.
It'll be back. There you go.
There we go. All right, so we'll talk about our assessment findings, some of our strategies and recommendations. We'll summarize some of the budget indications and whatnot, and we'll walk through it. So I mentioned that we work all over the United States. We work primarily with municipalities and other local governments exclusively. We also don't sell any hardware or software, so we're independent consultants. We do studies and project management and various types of things.
And I live in Palm Desert, so I'm in the valley.
Good point. We've actually worked with over 500 agencies, over 3,500 projects. We've done this actual project that we did for you with over 150 agencies. Here's most of our California agency clients, but that's about all we could fit on that slide. All right, let's talk about the objectives. So, you know, one of the major overarching objectives here is to align your technology and your technology use with your actual city strategies and your goals, your operations. So some of the obvious things like improving constituent services, increasing productivity and efficiencies in the departments, and that's about manual processes and data and integration and things like that. In regards to reducing risk, there's different types of risk that are addressed here, certainly cybersecurity and all that goes with that, but there's other types of risk when you're looking at city operations, compliance issues, being able to report, even risks of losing key people or institutional knowledge when it's in someone's head instead of in a system. IT staffing, so we took a look at your staffing and we have some recommendations there going forward. In the end, what you have is a roadmap. You have dozens of technology projects of various types. They're prioritized, their budgets, there's timing. So these are the projects each year laid out in this plan. Some key comments about our methodology, really in phase one. The key point here is that we created stakeholder teams within each department. Those were cross-functional folks, management, admin, subject matter experts, people maybe out in the field. So in total, this is more than a strategic plan. In total, about 1 in 4 of your city employees actually participated in this project and participated in at least one or more assessment workshops. In the assessment phase, we had 2 consulting teams, one working on all things technical, IT if you will, whether it's network, hardware, cybersecurity, staffing, operations, communications, et cetera, and then another team working with your actual departments and all of their application systems, which are hundreds of them, understanding their operations and how we can fill in operational needs and constituent services better using technology. In the third phase, we went away. We essentially had really realistically 1,000 or more different points of challenges and needs. Incorporated that into several dozen project initiatives, which you have a copy of those. And that's where we pulled all of that together. And those explain the technology of the project, what our findings were related to your needs, your challenges, your pain points, and then our recommendations going forward, which could have been directional, could have been next steps, could have been best practices to follow to be successful. Phase 4 was really then coming back with committees, going through all of that, making sure that staff validated that information. We went through a prioritization process, a budget process. This is a very collaborative process for the city and very comprehensive. And what you then have is all of those projects prioritized, budgeted, and timelined. All right.
We talked to the IT team many times during the course of this. Sure, yeah. it's a little short for me. You raise it up. We spoke with the IT team many times through the process and conducted a cybersecurity assessment as a part of the process. Overall, we were impressed with the IT infrastructure of the city. Jan and team had done a really good job keeping current with technology and doing quite a bit on the cybersecurity front. There's always more to do, but really good start. The move to Office 365 is strategically sound, and there are recommendations in the report to leverage Office 365 to further to make the city more productive. David? Oh, I got to do the next one? I got to keep going. Okay. Other recommendations are technology governance related to how projects are selected for work at the city, prioritization, and making sure that all the departments are aligned together in really what is a shared resource. Policies and procedures to formalize some of the things that the IT team is already doing, making sure all those are well documented and easy to kind of transmit over time. Disaster recovery has also been worked on since we developed the plan. Phase 1 of that is done. Phase 2 is yet to be done, which is really cloud-based restoration of city services. And then incident response and disaster recovery. Jan got a lesson in incident response this last week. You may have read about a company called CrowdStrike and all the fallout from that. And then another item is public safety video. Do I have to talk more? Oh, you go.
All right. So one of our findings, probably the biggest one overall, is high demand for departmental application system improvements. So these major software systems are the backbone of your day-to-day operations within those departments. Over the last number of years, you've been replacing or improving a lot of those major systems, and those improvements continue, but there's still a lot of work to be done. Overall, there was 38 different application, either an improvement, a replacement, or needing something new for an operation or a department. Things like improving reporting, workflow automation. Sometimes some things are still tracked in Microsoft Excel or something's done still in a paper process. So reducing those types of things, we call them shadow systems. We want to try to automate and streamline as much as possible. That's also part of getting institutional knowledge out of people's head and into your technology infrastructure. So some of the...
I wonder, could I ask a question?
Yes,
'Cause
absolutely.
It's very complex, or for me anyway.
No worries.
So I don't get lost in the weeds here. So there's one page on our booklet. It says Budget Technology Master Plan, and you had mentioned Office 365.
Mm-hmm.
So it says for the budget, it's $99,000 for 2023, 2024, and then it goes up to $500,000. So is that the, so it says fiscal year 2024 to 2025, $500,000. So is that the application? It doesn't have, we don't have page. It is IT 52 on Budget Technology Master Plan under budgets. So I just didn't know what that applied to, and I wanted to make sure I knew what was happening.
Item 52 is,
It's the $500,000 is right here.
So it starts with 99 and then goes to,
Yeah, that's
oh,
the
it's just
range.
the low and high.
That's the range.
We're here.
Yeah. It's the range.
Oh, the low and high. That's the range over time.
okay.
Okay, and then each of the columns going forward are the actual budget estimates by year.
Okay, so is that the software application commit, like subscription price? Is that the, okay. Okay, I just wanted to know what it was. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, can I say something? For
Yeah.
I threw you off, but I didn't.
Yeah, no, you're right on target.
Okay,
For lots of these recommendations, we talk about this. You know, you don't just buy it once, you buy it every year,
okay.
right? And so there's several things that just kind of continue out, and that's because they're a subscription of one form or another. And what we're actually doing here is recommending expansion of Office 365 licensing to actually give IT some more tools
Oh, I see.
for cybersecurity and actually to make staff more efficient.
Okay, so in other words, you're expanding the subscription capacity and capabilities
Correct.
to do,
Yeah.
okay, got it, thank you.
Another point is that particular number is not necessarily new technology expenditures, because you've always had some type of Microsoft licensing, whether it was Office products or other things. Now, Microsoft has bundled everything together. So what might have been in the past smaller items are now all grouped together and licensed together. Hopefully that helps.
It does, thank you.
All right, some of the major systems, I mean, you have major enterprise systems that really affect every department. You have some application systems that, affect one or a couple altogether. I don't remember what the exact count was, but you have probably over 200 to 300 different applications and modules in use across all your departments. It's quite complex. Document management system is another major system that still requires improvements. Your work order asset management system, primarily for public works, but other departments is still has more improvement to come, and those improvements have already were started before we did the plan, we're ongoing. And your land management system, your permitting, planning, inspections, et cetera. Those are some of the major systems. So on this next slide, this graph, what it shows you is a breakdown of the different technology initiatives by category. We talk a lot about best practices. Best practices, it's not that the city wasn't following them, but they really require emphasis. Sometimes maybe utilize them more than you have in the past, or if you haven't, doing that. But it's really about being successful with your technology. You've invested tens of millions of dollars already over the years in what you have in technology. So following best practices is important. You'll see the biggest category, again, is the departmental applications. We've separated out the smart technologies, and then you have the IT infrastructure, cybersecurity, day-to-day IT operations, and telecommunications. This is really telling you the priorities by category. You can see that the departmental applications is the largest high priorities, but in almost every category, most of these project initiatives were considered high by staff. So how do we improve? Well, we focus on training to streamline your operations. Training should be an ongoing thing. The biggest need operationally, pretty much with any agency that we ever work with, is training of the users. When users don't know how to use a particular software, they create paper, they create other little applications, they work around things manually, they do things in Excel. So dedication to training, and then think about it, you're hiring people and now they're learning on the job. They didn't get the benefit of the original vendor training or implementation. People move jobs, move departments. So a constant focus of that, and honestly, most agencies, almost all agencies we work with don't have enough focus on training. Going forward, doing software assessments, which is really about understanding what those gaps are and how do we improve the system, how do we add the ability to collect more data, how do we improve the reporting, how do we automate things. And that's really the last bullet there, and there's a best practice initiative about it, the application management and support best practices. So there is commentary about how to move forward in a better way in the future. Did you have a question?
All right?
Yes.
Okay. So when you talk about the importance of training and training and training and then more training, at what point can they fly on their own? So I can remember when 365 came out and I needed a lot of help figuring it out. Now I've pretty much got it, and when new things come out, I can just read about it, and I can make that transition from where I am to some new upgrade this year or something even bigger, because I have the basis of knowledge. It's just the new things that are coming. Do you get to that point, or do you always want to do the training yourselves?
Well, so different people learn at different levels. Some people are technical savvy, some people aren't. You have a movement of people. You have new people, people moving into new positions, people that knew how to use something when they had this role. Now they're in a new role. you mentioned like 365, and a lot of people can kind of pick up on a new version of something. Some of that, depending on the system, these major enterprise systems are not really designed to be self-learned.
So we will be forever dependent upon you.
In some, no, not us.
That's
No,
what I was going to
we
clarify.
we don't do your
I'm
training.
using us in the religious way.
Yeah.
Whatever your group is.
No, but yet, to be honest with you, yes, you will always be dependent on training. You have hundreds of applications and modules, and you have hundreds of employees. So, when you put in a new major system, if you were thinking about a curve of training, that goes up for that system. But the reality, any organization is going to need continuous training. Things change. You replace things. Vendors, sometimes those version to version changes and
Who
upgrades.
does the training?
Some of it could be IT folks, some of it can be outside resources, some of it can be through the software vendors. There's a variety of different ways. And we have a discussion in one of the best practices initiatives about putting together a training program.
Can I say this?
Yeah.
For some of our best practices agencies, what we do is a rotating every 3 years, tips and tricks. So about every 3 years, we catch the improvements in the application software, and there's dollars in the budget under one of the best practices it's actually a relatively small amount given the whole thing, for something like that, for the major enterprise systems. So every 2 or 3 years, you can do tips and tricks, and that'll catch all the new things. So training's a lifelong thing, and people come and go, and so it's really, I think, quite necessary.
Thank you for your time.
Yeah.
And just in the budgets for the individual projects or application systems, if there was training,
She's trying to ask.
those estimates for that project or that application are included in the budgets.
Okay, and that was, and I saw on your cover sheet the 4 different areas where you provide consulting services, and one was education. That's my background. So it seems in my looking at it, it's easier to organize for an education system because we had staff development days, and we could prioritize by school in the district what we were going to do. So here, it seems more challenging. And then on page 14 under Technology Master Plan, it says there's going to be a technology steering committee that is going to make a decision about how that staff development or training unfolds. Is that correct? Is that the way it looks?
Correct. The
Okay.
department heads will have a say in the training offered each year as a
Okay.
part of the technology thing, and then they'll say, really this year, we've got a bunch of new employees, we really need intermediate Excel or whatever it happens to be.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think to add on to that, Councilmember, the part of the challenge is that, and I think as David and Tom have mentioned, there are so many different systems that the city uses. So you have the dispatchers that have systems. We have the finance backbone, our Munis system. We have the new ERP system that's doing all the permitting and licensing and everything else, along with just day-to-day softwares like the Microsoft applications. I think part of it is also looking for what our current needs are and utilizing the systems we have better. And then those ongoing needs as we have the new staff coming in. But part of it is we also don't have, and probably will never have the appropriate level of resources. We have a relatively small IT department. We have one applications person that right now is very heavily involved in one project. And so as we go forward, when all of the departments are kind of coming and saying, this is my priority need, this is my priority need, what we're trying to do is have a governance team that really looks at that and helps weigh the priorities along with the strategic direction of the city so that we can best meet those needs, I would say.
Thank you for the explanation. Thank you.
Yeah. This morning I was on a call with a police commander. We were talking about policies, new policies. We're writing some new policies for them, 14 in all, and then at the end of the conversation she says, now we have to figure out how to train staff to adopt these policies. It just keeps going and things keep changing, and so it's just, and one other thing I was going to say is, you in education come up with a great term for it. You don't call it training, you call it professional development, right? Which is a way better term, better marketing term than training.
All right. This next graph. I'll talk a little bit more about budget. This historically shows the overall technology spending to overall city operational expenditures. So that's general fund and anything else that supports people or systems. And this is a common metric that we do among agencies. In the report, it says how many we utilized for this analysis, but it shows that the city, although it's improving its technology expenditures, it's really below industry averages and any benchmark recommendation. The other thing that you'll see when we get several slides forward is that to catch up in this plan, you're going to need to spend over a recommended benchmark just to catch up. So to put that in perspective, the other thing to keep in perspective is that when you look at a benchmark, and that's the average of the agencies, we've both worked with hundreds of local government agencies, mostly cities, and 90+% of them are understaffed from an IT perspective. Sorry, do you want to finish that?
Yeah, so the key points are, spending is improved. The staff have done a good job of actually increasing IT spending a bit, but still there's a ways to go. David mentioned the benchmark. The benchmark is actually 38 local government agencies, all around the same size as Cathedral City. They're from our client base, and we vetted the numbers ourselves. I think there are some significant refresh projects in the future. That's a part of what's actually in the upcoming spend. And then the move to, and you'll see it in the further graphs, the move to subscription services is just driving the cost of technology up. So those are key points.
So this benchmark is interesting, and I think it's important so we can see how we compare. But hopefully, and you've already kind of covered, there's going to be more going into, because spending for the sake of spending is okay. So you're saying we've underspent some of our peers on average. So while that's interesting to note, it's, at least for me, it doesn't mean anything unless you're saying, well, we have projects that there's reason for that because we have, some projects that we need to. And you're kind of touching on that, but I'm hoping you're not going to, as you work with staff, say, well, you need to find more stuff because you're underspending, It's like, well, no, maybe they're being efficient. We like efficient. We like finding value. So I think I'm not trying to dismiss it because it follows the theme, as you've said, that maybe we're short-staffed. But again, we're short-staffed, but it needs to identify, well, what do we need that could be staffed or can be done through contract, that type of a thing. So I hear you, but I'm hoping you're not, this is just one of many benchmarks, and we're not trying to say, well, if we were spending 4% of budget, then everything would be fine, because I would say, well, no, that depends on what you're spending on and how is it actually matching the needs of our departments.
Yeah, I would say we pride ourselves on being practical. We work in local government, and people don't want to spend their money on fluff.
Right.
And I think a statistic to help with that is, David mentioned 38 application initiatives. There's 66 initiatives in the report. Our typical reports range from 60 initiatives to 100 initiatives. And each initiative has a budgeted amount. We only put in there what we think you need out of all the wide range of IT things. So it's focused on what you need, and we're not asking for fluff here. We're not recommending.
I'm not saying
fluff.
you are. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
Hopefully, this is more of just one of many benchmarks to kind of compare, because I'm sure there can be all kinds of reasons why, and you've alluded to it somewhat, why some.
Sure.
Some organization may have a much higher spend, or at least for a period of time. Another one may have a lower spend. Because in priorities, other things can happen where you might have to take a lower spend for a while.
Yes.
So I understand why you're presenting this as a benchmark. I'm just saying while it's interesting to know, I wouldn't take just the amount of spend as a goal.
Correct.
Okay.
What's next? Me again. All right. So we talked about governance. You know, we've talked about Office 365 and the need to expand that to increase staff collaboration capabilities and really sharing not just amongst city staff, but all the constituencies using the tools, sharing capabilities and collaboration tools. Cybersecurity continues to be important. And this fall, a whole new set of cybersecurity requirements are being required of the police department by the federal government, called the Computer Justice Information System Policy. That's updated, and that's significant. I mean, it's really it's actually, the policy is 1,300 lines of different things you have to do. And then IT operations, policies and procedures, and just automating the things you do every day, like creating logins or disabling people when they leave, all those kinds of things are things that we recommend. I think you're next, David.
So back to the theme of improving operations. The number one way to do that is to improve the utilization of all of these applications. Because when people don't use what it's capable of, they're working around it in a less efficient manner, workaround, manual, et cetera. Training we've talked about is about that. The continuous improvement and how to do that. There are proactive ways to do that. And so we talk about those in a number of different best practices. So there is some cause and effect to the spend. It's not the simple answer, but it's one metric, as you mentioned.
Okay, here we are back to benchmarks again. There are 3 benchmarks there that we use with our local government agencies. Let me see if I can do what David did and make them bigger. Okay. Logins per IT staff, which the city is about on par with comparative agencies. Computers or devices per IT staff, which the city is IT staff have a few more devices than is typical, about 20-25% more than is typical with other agencies. And then servers per IT staff, which is really kind of a measure of complexity of the environment overall, where IT staff are managing about twice as many servers as typical for an agency of the city size. So here we're trying to show you, several benchmarks that we use, and they tend towards a bit of understaffing, and the spending benchmark tends towards a bit of understaffing also. See if I can figure out how to get out of here. Okay. The things we found that were needed through our interviews and comparative analysis are improved desktop support services. At the time we did this work, there's one IT individual supporting all the desktops for the agency, which actually caused more senior staff to spend too much time on desktop work, and is inefficient because it essentially costs you more to support your desktops. Cybersecurity, we can kind of see the trend that cybersecurity is becoming more and more important, and I talk about it more and more with folks like you every day. And you need a focal point. You need someone who's managing all the various pieces of the cybersecurity program for the city, making sure they're all in place and all running well. It's not just about new things, it's about there are a lot of things to look at repetitively. Are the logs running right? There's just lots of things to do, and some of them are repetitive and some of them are new programs. And it's an increased cost of doing business that's really gone up a whole bunch in the last 3 years. So, over the near term, we really recommend using contract subject matter experts to help you with some of these things. But over the longer term, a second IT support technician and a cybersecurity analyst would be our recommendations. Any questions related to that?
Probably 1,000.
Yeah.
No, I don't know if we need to get in the weeds about, well, what would the technician is, you've kind of covered, would work on desktops, what
Yeah.
would an analyst do? But I think at this point, since we're not looking at hiring them, it's in the future.
And Councilmember, these are one of the things that we already have in budget. We had a IT engineer, I forget the exact, no, who before, the person that left, Rudy? So we had an applications engineer position that was really just doing desktop support. And when they left the organization, we used that budget to hire the full-time IT support technician, and we're currently recruiting for a half-time position. So we've already tried to address the desktop support issue, because we really were utilizing like Jan and Justin and the higher-level employees to do the desktop application, which really isn't the best use of their time. The additional cybersecurity analyst, as mentioned, we will look at that as we look at future budgets of whether we look at contracting services out for identified needs, or at some point in the future having a position doing it.
I guess that's what I'm in agreement. I don't know whether we need to go into what that is right now, because it's two words, but it might mean something different to everybody as to what that person would actually be doing, or the job functions if it was through a contract or something. So
Yeah, and the intent tonight isn't to ask for budget authority on any of this. What David and Tom are presenting and going to be presenting is kind of the overall picture of what the needs are. They have done some of the work of identifying what the costs of those would be. And then as we go through our budget process, in the current year with the budget that we have and in future budgets, we will utilize this information to help drive our prioritization of spending, and then any additional budget requests that have to be made over time. And in working with David and Tom, especially in the last year, it's recognized that there might be recommendations in this, in the current year that are going to be spread out because of the impact that the storms have had on the city. But the intent today isn't to ask for any particular budget on this.
And keep in mind that your terminology is very short and concise. And if nobody knew what the United Nations was, and they were saying that it's going to be $3 trillion to this group called the UN, you might all be saying, what the heck is that, right? And I'm feeling a little bit of this here. You're going to spend a lot of time on desktop support, and thinking, hell, my desktop's in good shape. I don't know what you're talking about. I'm being a little naive, but not terribly naive, not too far from the truth. So personally, I feel a little overwhelmed, but I know we can get there.
Okay. Yeah, it's hard to explain in a session like this in detail.
Hands on.
Yeah. See what's next. Oh, budgets. Okay, so we already opened up a budget page and talked to you about that. Again, I think I'll make it bigger, do the zooming in thing again. From left to right, the technology initiative, these all match up with the report, a brief comment, and then the priority high is years 1 and 2. That's what staff requested. These were all prioritized in a workshop with staff. Low to high ranges for the cost of the item, and then over to the right. I wish I had my touch screen, but I don't have my touch screen. There you go. Are the various budget years down this way, and we did this a bit ago, so the years kind of need to move forward. And as you can see, there are items that have dollars in future budget years that just kind of go out and maybe increase a bit, and those are ongoing subscriptions in most cases. Some things are multi-year projects. Okay, 6-year budget. I would say most agency, we actually are starting a technology plan for a Bay Area agency. We did their plan 7 years ago. They called us and said, okay, we're about done with that. It's time to do another. And then that was a 5-year plan. So it's pretty typical for an agency to take a couple extra years to do this. Something else happens along the way. Funding's not available. It's not like mandatory that you do these things in the order in which in which they're laid out here. We would expect the Technology Steering Committee to reprioritize or adjust priorities on an ongoing basis.
So how do you go about prioritizing? You start with what you think is the most necessary that the city needs?
Yeah, there's kind of two pieces. David will talk about how the application side is prioritized. On the technical side, we start with really, it's risk-based. What we think what we would like the city to do to reduce risk, more often than not, that's the key driver on the technical side. David, you want to talk about how you prioritize on the application side?
Actually, before you tell us that, I want to ask you a question because it might fall right into there. So let's say, and this is all just made up, it's just made up numbers, but we say, gosh, there's been a bit of a downturn, and this year we only have $1 million to spend. Do you say, well, the $1 million has to go into the next category because that's what we're going to work on? Or are you able to look at it again and say, well, we understand you're kind of in a pinch. You have 4 options, or you can split it up into these different categories and downsize a little bit, and to be able to, because you're talking about many, many years, and I've seen us go up and down twice in 15 years. So, it would be helpful to know you had flexibility.
Yeah, I think you certainly have flexibility. One thing going back to, remember, the way we did a very holistic assessment approach. So 1 in 4 of your staff gave feedback about what their needs are, what their challenges in doing their job, and what would help them be more efficient, automate, do something better for the citizens. So a lot on the department side isn't necessarily mandatory. It's about improvement. And improvements is always about prioritization, and those are business decisions. So if you do have a budget crunch one year, we always believe in collaborative planning. This process was very collaborative, maybe the most collaborative project the city's ever done. And hopefully the city would learn from that, because a lot of information is siloed. So, they learn from each other. But if you're going to look at these, that's what part of governance committee is. What's going on? What do we have? Do we need to cut back? Where are we going to cut back? Where can we really not afford to cut back? Some of the risk items, especially about cybersecurity, it's exponential. Especially cybersecurity, and that's what's one of the items that's ballooning IT budgets over the last 5-7 years. It is so broad and so significant. It isn't anything like it was. It's like we're in a new century related to cyber risk, and that's putting a lot of pressure on IT departments, staff, knowledge, training, systems. So, as an example, those are probably the items you're not going to cut back on. It's going to be somewhere else.
Hopefully not on city council, because we all want to stay.
All right, so the point of this graph is that based on these project budgets and the way the priorities were initially done collaboratively by representatives of all departments, and Tom had mentioned earlier, and I know this is a presentation and there's a lot of information in these reporting documents, but there's a lot of IT infrastructure refresh that has to happen. If you see the colors in the categories on the right, so these categories on the right, so the IT infrastructure, you've got a lot of refresh. You have a lot of equipment and servers and other things that are end of life and or cybersecurity things that need to be put in place. And so if you think about this in a sort of a macro sense, and not all of this spending is net new spending each year. Some of this you budget every year for your Microsoft licenses and things like that. Yes, they're in the budget, but you commonly do that. But if you just look at the trend line, you're going to have to spend significantly to get caught up from where you are. And before you would get into kind of more of a level off, hopefully at a higher number than historically you've been, so you don't get behind again. Hopefully that makes sense. And this is another similar way to look at it, the high priorities. Priorities change. This is a plan. It's a master plan. So it's a plan as of today. And so your governance committee needs to continue to work it. And you guys will change priorities. There will be something that staff thought about in year 4. And next month, city council is going to say, you know what, we really want that in 6 months, and you're going to do what you need to do. Or you're going to decide, you know what, we need to make some trade-off. We need to let's move that out. It's less important. Some of the later year initiatives, there's research that has to be done, cost benefit has to be done. It could be something that's in year 4, and maybe when you get there and you actually do your due diligence, you may say, we're not going to do this because it's not cost beneficial. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So this is meant to be dynamic and worked. And we would recommend that you do your reprioritization at least annually with the governance committee, and we'd really recommend you do it a couple months before you start your budget season. That way, when you start your annual budget season, the department's already thinking about technology operationally, and they're already coming to the table ready for that to be part of the conversation. So, and make adjustments accordingly.
We've talked about these. We can go to the next slide.
There you go. More questions and answers.
Council?
I do have a question.
Okay.
Now, each department, for instance, the police department has their own, as it was mentioned, they have dispatch software, they have so many other softwares that they utilize. Did you talk, and they also have their budget for each department. Planning department has their own budget, and police department does. So did you talk to them, and did you analyze how they actually spend their budget, and also where the technology stands when it comes to each department?
Yes, we did separate assessments with every department, including the police department. Our scope is first about what the needs are going forward. That's improvement, that's replacement, that's new, as it relates to technology and systems. So our scope isn't about the overall departmental budget, but about those new projects going forward. And those are individually identified in the project plan, and they're also in the budget worksheet.
Okay, because I believe I'm, just like my colleagues, is a little bit overwhelmed how much information there is. And also technology, of course, if you're not in the field, you become overwhelmed. So for me to understand certain things, for instance, firewalls and cybersecurity and things like that, I understand a little bit, but it's not my business, it's not my profession. So for council, it might be a little bit overwhelming when it comes to understanding exactly what we need to do.
It's not our area.
Correct.
I can make a bad creme brulee, you know, can you make one this afternoon? You know, it's one of those kinds of things, right?
Not me.
But you know, I can, right? Obviously, it's not equal. Cybersecurity and a dessert are not exactly on the same plate, but it's the idea that you have this area of expertise that's so far afield that we have some learning to do.
One thing I know, there's a lot of documentation there, and when you first look at it, it can be like drinking from a fire hose. But we try to write our reports in as layperson terminology as possible, so that if you were to say pick up a police department project initiative, you can generally understand what's happening here. And in some cases, we've given specific examples of what problems or needs are. So you can say, oh, they're doing some common thing that most organizations do automated or electronic, and they're still doing it on paper, as an example. So, and that's to give you an understanding of the types of challenges that they have with some of these systems.
And Councilmember, I think the one thing takeaway I'd like to give to the council too is while the entire plan was presented to you, I know there was the executive summary and the whole plan, it isn't our intention that that be something that you as a council become technical experts on. I think in providing the whole plan, we wanted to be able to express just the complexity of what IT does for the city. That I think sometimes it's easy to just see the desktops and you maybe see the MDC in a police car, but all the real nuts and bolts of it's kind of what happens behind the scenes, and then also how technology enhances our ability to do our jobs and serve our constituents. So the hope is that we have a very complex plan that has been based on very deliberate and very extensive input from our staff, and that is going to help us guide our budgetary decisions, in the future. So as we present our budgets and present our asks, in the ongoing years, we will have that, and we'll be able to see how we're utilizing this as the guidelines for future asks based on those priorities. So I know it is a lot of information, for I think all of us. It's a lot of information for Jan. It's kind of like, he can read this in his sleep and understand it, but for most lay people, myself included, it is a bit overwhelming. But what I've really appreciated about the work that David and Tom have done for us too is that, and what I really appreciate about working with them is that they're not trying to sell us anything. They're very software and technology agnostic, so it isn't like, okay, you're going to do these servers and hey, we can get you a good deal on Dell servers. They're not that. What they've also provided us just in the guidance in this is, you're doing things different ways, or give us suggestions, or here's a city that has really implemented something really well. And so they've I think tried to provide us guidelines and some suggestions on ways to go, but haven't tried to build this that. I think to the point that Councilmember or Mayor Pro Tem Ross asked about training, that it isn't intended that they're going to provide our training for us. They're here to give us the guidance on where we need to go, and then it's up to us and up to staff to create those operational plans to make it work for us.
Thank you, Ann. Councilmember Gregory?
Yeah, I have a couple of questions, but I want to say I appreciate that. And I understand, I don't want to speak for my peers, but I think we're all kind of feeling the same way. Sometimes when we cover things in study sessions and then we don't have a lot of questions, we say, oh, we're all good. Then budget time comes and it's like, oh, well, and when there's items in there, it's like, well, we want to ask questions. We're like, oh, that was covered in that was covered in that study session. I'm saying, I think what my peers are, well, we reserve the right, if that happens, to come back and say, hey, there was a lot of stuff in that master plan. So if these are the ones we're going to go forward on, at that point, we may want more details. So I think we're just signaling that if that's because that's the way I'm feeling too. But I do appreciate what you're saying, that this is kind of an overall, and I appreciate that there will be another piece to come forward before budget that actually then prioritizes the actual spend. So when the budget does come to us, it's not just everything that was marked on here for 24 or 25, 26, but it'll, and you said this was a 6-year, but 1 year's already passed that's on here. So it really is a 5-year with a look back at history, I suppose you might say, or what could have been.
Well, and I think as Tom, I'm sorry, Charlie.
I can tell you, when we get to the budget, you won't be able to do everything that's listed in the plan for 26 for the budget. You'll probably recall about a year ago, maybe a little less, John came here with the pavement management program, and it was much the same type of thing. Here's where we need to be spending. Here's what we have. We've taken some steps to try to address that, but the gap hasn't been closed completely, and that's why budgeting for you as elected officials and for us as staff is one of the most complicated and important things we do, because we have to determine among these competing priorities where to put the money. And we won't be able to do everything. Okay. We never have, no city ever does.
Well, then that's fair. All right, so my questions had to do with just a couple. And one, you've touched a little bit on, you've touched on cybersecurity, and then you kind of mentioned this recent CrowdStrike and what happened with the blue screens of death and the industries that were affected. But there's also, it kind of struck me because there's also quite a lot in here about going more cloud-based. So as somebody that doesn't really necessarily understand all the inner workings, it seems like when you see something that was cloud or update related, and then it caused everything to stop working, that there's this question of, well, should we be looking at really, do we want everything to be cloud-based, or should there be something that's not cloud-based? So without trying to get too technical, I don't know if you can speak to that as to why, kind of support why going cloud-based is more secure in the cyber-secure world, and if there's any mitigating things that are part of that.
Sure. First, I'd like to go on the record, though, when you get to budget process, I'm 10 minutes away. What we really want is for you to be successful, so I'm happy to come back and sit in. Okay.
How come 10 minutes away? Why not in Cathedral City?
Pardon?
Why are you 10 minutes away? Why don't you just live here in Cathedral City? It'd be so much easier.
Palm Desert was a client when we bought the house.
All right.
So, and they're still a client. So, at any rate, actually, the CrowdStrike incident was a local incident. The issue that occurred affected each individual PC and each individual server at the city. Jan said 90% of all devices. Each one had to be fixed individually because of where the issue was. It was actually during the boot process, and you literally had to hit a certain set of keystrokes to get the boot to stop so you could fix it. So it really wasn't a cloud thing. I would not tell you that the cloud is more secure. It has different security issues than on-premise does. There are some things that we really, I believe, should stay on-premise for a good deal of time. You mentioned Police CAD. There are now Police CAD systems that are in the cloud. I just don't think that's necessarily the greatest thing ever, because there are other things that can cause the internet to go a bit haywire. The point, a good deal of the reason folks are moving to the cloud is the pressure from the vendor community and they only are providing systems that are cloud-based because they realize their revenue stream is better. An annual subscription model generates more revenue to them than someone replacing their software every 10 or 15 years and paying for a maintenance cost along the way. There's a good deal of pressure from lots of vendors for, you can keep your on-premise system, but we're only updating the cloud version. That's a different set of problems. There are things you can do to mitigate risks in the cloud related to asking for, industry standard audits, making sure that they do disaster recovery things, all those kinds of things. But the cloud vendors that local governments used, the main ERP vendor was also affected by the CrowdStrike thing, and certain systems were down at that vendor for a significant amount of time. So there's no single solution. We look at environments and we really want people to diversify their solution set to the degree that if they're not risking the entire operation on one vendor as much as possible. But that's really, really tough to do.
Right. I guess when I was reading this, I was catching a theme that one of the reasons to go to the cloud or more cloud-based was because of security.
Yeah.
So what I'm hearing is realistically, you realize that that's mixed.
It's very much mixed. I think due to the expense of cloud services, there are people that were putting their entire server, all their servers in the cloud. It's more expensive. We were working with a community up by the Bay Area. We did the budget for him and said, here's the cloud cost. He's like, I can't afford that. You still got everything on premise, But if the report led you to believe that, I'll have to go back and read it.
And maybe it's just the way I'm reading it. Maybe it refers to more frequent updates, those types of things, which makes certain things more secure.
Yeah, we do have, we have a subset of clients that like cloud-based software systems because they get regular updates. And what it does is it actually forces the departments to do what they should be doing anyway, which is, I'm not saying this is you, do what they should be doing anyway, which is maintaining their software systems. I've had people tell me straight out, we're going cloud-based because we can't get the department to keep their system up to date, and this is the best way to do it.
I see. All right. Well, no, I'm actually happy to hear that you're not sold on one way or the other, and as you're advising, at least you're looking at what's the best mix, I guess I would say. And I also appreciate your candor that a lot of this is because it's not a surprise for anyone at home that everything wants to go subscription-based, where it used to be you would go and buy the software and it would last for a certain number of years. Like you're saying, you might subscribe to updates or something, but now they don't even sell that. And I think seems like the move is that you don't even really have much of a computer at home anymore that really keeps any memory. They want everything to be stored on an iCloud or that type of a thing and come in. So, but a lot of that does appear to be vendor-based, as you're saying, because they get a subscription.
That can be one of the benefits is, eventually you're just going to have essentially a terminal that reads web pages on your desk or wherever. But we're a long way from there yet. And like I said, there's some things that are going to stay on premise in the computer room for a good deal of time because they're just actually more secure there. And, Chief wants direct control over his CAD system. He doesn't want to have to call a vendor and look at a web page for them to say it's going to be 24 hours before it's up. That's not what he wants.
Okay. In your review, did you also look at software duplication? And I know you talked about how people had processes and sometimes they would do them manually. And I think what we find over time, and we've been a bit decentralized in our controls over time, and we're trying to get better about that so that the departments can work better with each other, but also we don't have duplication of software processes. So I don't know if that occurs that much. I know there's that one good example that's kind of universal is there's the Zoom world, and then there's Teams, and then a lot of times you're buying Microsoft, you're paying for Teams that I've heard arguments both ways that it works great inside, it doesn't work as well out in the public, but other people will say Teams works fine all over and you're already paying for it. So, and I'm not saying that that's something that we would necessarily have to go one way or the other, but hopefully it would be anywhere that you have software that's already doing something, and then maybe a department already has a different software that's kind of doing the same thing, that there would be some evaluation because, I could see some savings in not having to continuously pay for software updates or subscriptions.
Yeah, that's kind of one of the foundational things we look at. We didn't actually create a matrix for you in this scope of work for that, but we look at that because when we're looking at departmental, operational, and efficiency, it's about the overall process. How much time does it take to do this? And if I'm doing this particular process, whether it's something related to accounting and finance that every department's involved in, and we've got 5 different systems that we're doing in it, and we can get it down to maybe 2 systems or 1 system, that's generally speaking going to be more efficient because we're not popping out. It's also better integration of data, reporting, et cetera. So we do look at all of that. And then just using your analogy of Zoom versus Teams versus, pre-COVID, we'd go to a city and they've got like 4 different, video conferencing type applications licensed, and everyone has their favorites. And COVID happens, Zoom took off, and in response to that, Microsoft made Teams free, and including the call-in number. So, but sometimes there's differences in these. So you guys have standardized on Tyler's ERP system, finance, HR, payroll, permitting, planning, inspections, code enforcement, work order asset management. And they literally have dozens of software modules, as an example. And some of them are great, and they do a great job. And some of them are kind of mediocre for what they do, and some of them aren't a good fit for your city. So the best practice is always, if I need something new or I need to replace something, well, do I have another vendor that does that? And then analyze that first, because if it works for you functionally, it's probably the overall lower cost of ownership to do it. But then some people, they're like, well, we have this vendor, they have this module, we're using it. But sometimes that's a square peg in a round hole, and if you look at the entire process and the labor involved, you end up spending more money and you become less efficient. Nice. So, and just one last comment about Teams and Zoom, they are different. Most of our cities now are pretty standardized on Teams, but there are some things that you need for Zoom that Teams can't do, like maybe commission meetings or other types of public meetings and things, and Teams just doesn't have that functionality. So most people retain some, but Microsoft Teams, for the most part, what it does is free.
Yeah, a better example is SharePoint and Dropbox.
Oh, yes. That's another one. All right. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councilmember Lamb.
Great, thank you. And I don't have a question, it's just a comment on under technology current state assessment, and it's in our booklet pages 8 and 9. There's a great summary of, it says it below is a sample listing of the city's applications and modules, and it's not a complete inventory, but that was exceedingly helpful. And then it talks about you talked about the decision-making process of how to prioritize, and it talked about a technology steering committee and how to develop that. And then on that page 10, it talks about both initial and ongoing software training is needed for future applications and existing ones, and then it lists 4 specifics. ERP, the Enterprise Resource Planning, Enterprise Asset Management, the work order system, the land management, and CAD.
Those are your biggies.
Those are the. That's what I wanted to know. They are the biggest ones in the city of all the applications.
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
It is an eye-opener
Yeah,
how
it
much
is.
is there, isn't it?
Yes.
Most
Oh.
people have no idea.
Oh,
Last year, I was doing a workshop, and the city manager didn't believe me that the city had 282 applications, and we were on Teams, so I went to that page, I highlighted it in Excel, and I went down, and he's like, oh my gosh, now I understand why IT doesn't have enough resources.
Yes. It was great. Anyway, thank you.
Council, do we have anyone to speak from the public? Danny Lee?
I don't have any requests to speak forms. Danny, you would like to comment?
We've been waiting for you, Danny.
You guys
Sure,
sit down.
especially
It's
for
going to be a ride.
Wait, I got to get my sunglasses on, though. That sure is wonderful.
Well, so first of all, I just wanted to congratulate the IT team here for their progress over the last year. I mean, they've done wonders. I said to Matt jokingly the other day, he's brought us from the 19th century to the 20th, so we've got one more century to go. So there is still a huge challenge in bringing our systems into the 21st century and really making use of all that. One of which I would really hope we'll get to, which is improvement in CMS, which is the way that you build websites. And what I'd like to see is that that's all forced down levels so that the local authors are able to create the website content and keep it up to date, rather than that having to go back to specialists. And that's the way most people now do it. So that's one thing. The other thing is that the CMS needs to be data-driven. So one of the problems that Tracy, for example, has to struggle with, I keep sending her web pages and saying, this one's got the commission information on, so is this one, and they're both different. And that's because it's not data-driven. The information is not pulled from a database. So anyway, now, most of you already know that I spent 30 years in the IT industry, starting programmer and building up to IT director. So I did understand all the words, Councillor Ross. And I also spent some of that time in education in a computer manufacturing company, designing courses on security and disaster recovery for mission-critical systems. Those were the systems that drive most banks and stock exchange systems. They really cannot go down. Yeah. So I have maybe an old understanding of how that works now. Cybersecurity is another aspect of that. So 2 things. First of all, if you're going to invest in computer equipment and services, then buy the training. Because if you don't get the training that goes with those services, you won't get the ROI on the investment. Yeah? You're just not going to get that money back. So that's just the training part. In terms of disaster recovery and cybersecurity and cloud security and all those things, I know they sound mysterious, but here's the question that should be asked about disaster recovery, and that is, can you get our systems back online in 24 hours? That should be your basic question, and if not, why not, and what do we need to do to fix that? Because it doesn't matter whether it's CrowdStrike or it's a cybersecurity hacker, a ransomware attack. The building falls down in the earthquake, whatever it is, whatever wipes us out. We should be able to recover, and so that's what the recovery plan needs to say. And I don't know what ours says. Very rightly, I shouldn't know what it says. That's none of the public's business. So it may already be in there now, but if it isn't, then you need to find out why and to build that into the recovery plans. And there are ways to do that. Duplication of databases and so on that you touched on earlier on. We ought to have premises already identified where we can go set up if we need to. We ought to know where we get equipment if we need it in an emergency. We need to know how our third-party software vendors are going to provide for that switchover if we need to move to different premises and so on. So I'm hoping that's all in the plan already. Ann's nodding and saying, absolutely, you can shut up now. So I will. Thank you.
Thank you,
Come back
Danny.
in 2 weeks with another list.
I don't see anyone else. Dave, Tom, if you need a new employee, you got one sitting right here. I think it'd be an asset
I
for
was
you.
thinking we might bring him to other cities and do the intro.
You know, when I was just growing up, my dad introduced me to Jimmy Dean when he was coming out back in the 60s with his breakfast sausage. And like a dummy, I opened my mouth. I should have kept it shut. But I said, hey, are you ever going to have like hot breakfast sausage? And he said, 1 hoe, 1 row, 1 acre. So, I mean, we know we just can't get there overnight. So what we got going on here is really exciting. Cathedral City is going to benefit for it. I thank staff for just getting out there and researching this. And I think we're all pretty excited about it, even though I do know how to make creme brulee. I don't know.
He
So-
probably does. He's a great cook.
I would not trust me with a flamethrower. So, yeah.
Gentlemen, thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. And, I'm sorry? Vacant and abandoned building ordinance, city manager, do we have a staff report?
Yes, thank you. Andrew Firestein, our Development and Economic Services Director, is going to present this item, and this came from a council request during your future agenda items discussions a few meetings ago. And so he's going to give you an update on what we have in place now and what we found in looking at some other cities that might help address this concern. Thank you. Andy?
All right. Good afternoon, Mayor, Council. How's everyone doing?
Great.
Okay, I feel like I need to stretch a little bit here. So, leading off this presentation, as the city manager introduced, this came from a request from the city council back in April. And as I heard this, we developed an ordinance, we prepared this presentation, really focusing on commercial properties more so than residential. I'll get into this a little bit in the presentation. We also evaluated the current program. We do have a current program. It is on the website. This is focused on residential properties that are in a foreclosure process. It was developed during the Great Recession. It served a purpose, but as I'll get into in this presentation, it is obsolete. It has outlived its purpose, and our recommendation today is that the council consider repealing and replacing that with a new program and a new ordinance. So we took a look at that current program. Mentioned that we've prepared a new ordinance for council's consideration, and the item today really is for council discussion. We're looking for some direction from the council on what you'd like to do. Would you like to see some changes, modifications, and have this brought back at a future study session, or would you like us to bring this back at a public hearing for council consideration of the ordinance? So the current program, as I mentioned, was developed during the Great Recession, and this is intended for residential properties in a foreclosure process. The city collects $70 for every property that is registered on this list, and during its peak period, we did have hundreds of properties that were registered on this list, and it gave us an awareness of that property owner when property was going into foreclosure, who that trustee was, so that we had current contact information for that property in the event that there were code issues. Recently, though, we have seen a significant decline in the number of registrations under this program. In the last fiscal year, we had 1 property registered, and the fiscal year prior to that, 7. Today, that data really isn't doing a whole lot of good for us. We put it on a list, but we don't do anything with that list, and the $70 that we collect as far as a fee, it doesn't do much. So that's a candid assessment of our current program. We do, however, have a significant number of properties with vacant buildings. Staff's identified that most of these are commercial. There are some residential, but most of these are commercial. And many of these have become attractive nuisances, requiring a disproportionate share of code compliance time to enforce nuisance violations and other problems with those properties. And they've gotten to the state due to a lack of maintenance and a lack of monitoring from the property owner. The city's nuisance regulations allow the city to react when a problem develops, but there's insufficient teeth in our code today to require that property owner to actively monitor and maintain the property to prevent those conditions from beginning to begin with. And that's what we'd like to talk about today. So I wanted to share a few examples, and I think all of these will be familiar to the council. These are illustrations of the current problem and really what we tried to address as we prepared this draft ordinance. So on this slide, we have the Family Dollar on Date Palm Drive. We also have the former Burlington Coat Factory. Both of those are vacant. And we also have the former Walmart site further up on Date Palm Drive, another that has some tenants, but largely that is a vacant center. On Palm Canyon, we have this project on the left, and Cathedral Canyon, that is a residential development. Now that one has restarted, that was tied up as a result of the death of the property owner, but that project has restarted.
Where is that wooden building? And where?
The one on the right is on Cathedral Canyon.
Oh, all right. Oh, I see. Yeah, okay.
The one on the left, yes, right next to Boomers, correct.
Palm Canyon.
So we looked at other ordinances, you know, who has an abandoned or vacant building ordinance that we could model. And in my last stop, the city I worked in had similar problems. They had a lot of commercial vacancies in their downtown, and they had property owners that, for whatever reason, weren't actively marketing those properties, and they chose to really take a tax loss, leave it vacant, and leave the city dealing with the blight and really the unattractiveness of having those vacant and abandoned buildings in their downtown. In that city, they did the same research. They looked to see who had an ordinance they could model, and ironically, the city of Palm Springs has a great ordinance. Their ordinance was done in 2020, and the city I worked in last used that as a model ordinance. And looking at it through our lens, through what our needs are, I would say that it is a good model for us as well. So I'd like to describe the City of Palm Springs ordinance. Their ordinance applies to both residential and commercial properties. Requires a property owner to register a building within 10 days of the building becoming vacant. And they define a vacant building to mean a building where at least 35% of the total floor area within the building is not lawfully occupied. So if you think about a major commercial center, when it loses that anchor tenant, when it loses some of those inline tenants, when 35% of that center becomes vacant, then it is subject to that ordinance in the city of Palm Springs. So Palm Springs requires residential properties of 4 units or less to register as part of the program. They require them to provide contact information and a maintenance plan, but they're not required to pay the maintenance fee, that monitoring fee that commercial properties are required to pay. Commercial properties in Palm Springs are required to do the same things as the residential properties, but they are required to secure and monitor their building, provide a monthly report, and they're also required to retain a local property management company when the ownership is more than 40 miles outside of the city limits. They're also charged a fee to support a monitoring program for commercial properties. Palm Springs sets administrative fines at $2,500 for the first offense, $5,000 for the second offense, and $25,000 for the third offense. That seems steep, but in the context of commercial properties, it's proportionate to the value of those properties, and I would say as well, the impact they have on the community when they're left vacant and they become blighted. Really, that fine is meant as a disincentive and an encouragement to those property owners to follow this ordinance, to register the properties, to monitor and maintain the properties in accord with the ordinance. Doesn't mean that they have to occupy them. It simply means that they need to secure them so that they don't become home to squatters, and they maintain them so that they don't develop blight conditions that become
Excuse me, Andy?
nuisance.
Would there be any conditions or situations if the property is in probate or there's a lawsuit or if the bank's taken over and it's just, sometimes things just don't happen as quickly as expected through any kind of,
So there's not an exception per se for that. I'll get into some of the exceptions here in a moment for our program and what I'm recommending that Cathedral City do. But really, this is a registry. This is intended to identify those properties where they are vacant, they are abandoned, and In the case of Palm Springs, there's a higher level of required, higher set of requirements that they're required to meet in terms of proactively monitoring the property. You know, if the owner's within 40 miles, they can do the inspections. If they're more than 40 miles away, they use that local property manager to do routine inspections to make an attestation on the condition of the property, whether the burglary alarms, the fire alarms are working. That's really what's required of them to participate in the program. So there is a fee that's intended to offset the cost to the city to conduct routine inspections. Palm Springs does routine inspections of those properties as well to really ensure that they're being maintained, that there aren't code issues developing on those properties. So the fines, the penalties that you see here, you know, this is where one of those property owners is not participating. There is a vacant building and they're electing not to register as part of that program. So you could think of that sort of as that disincentive or you know, the penalty for not participating in a program that really is meant to help that property owner and to help the community as well.
Thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
I don't know if you want to take questions now or at the end. Do you?
I'm happy to take them at any
So
point.
you made a statement in here that you would be looking for properties that were 10 days vacant.
That's in Palm Springs, yes.
And is
we are
that-
recommending 30.
I'm sorry?
30,
We're going to be 30 here?
yes.
How would you know if someplace had been vacant for 30 days? I mean, it isn't like they deteriorate in 30 days.
Right, right. So let me actually step into some of the next slides because I think as we talk about the definitions, some of this will come out in that discussion. So staff looks at the Palm Springs program and we feel that this is a good framework, but we are recommending some modifications or changes to that. Principally, staff is recommending that really we look at commercial properties and apartments with 5 or more units. Putting a residential property on a list, it doesn't solve the problem.
Well, let me step in here then. So there was a reason why we had this initial registry, and even if it's not being used as it was probably intended because foreclosures have gone away, there are empty residential properties and there are even problematic residential properties throughout the city. So why are we now all of a sudden just going to cut the residential properties out?
So our thought there is that our existing nuisance regulations and
That is not proven to be sufficient. It takes a long period of time. It doesn't put any onus on the property owner to do regular checks or to keep the property up until something actually is extreme health and safety wise where code can come in. And they don't have any regular way to know which ones to check because we don't have them on our registration. So, and then I'm going to also focus back on the initial request made by the council member. He may be wanting to speak to this at some point. The initial request had to do with vacant properties, but it also had to do with squatters in vacant properties and able to take over residential properties, and the police show up and say it's a civil matter. And some cities have a registration now where they can register a property and say it's vacant, and when the police show up, they can run it on their database and they can say, no, this property has been registered as vacant and we're not going to accept your fake representation that you have some type of rental agreement, without some more proof, because it's on our registration as vacant. That was what you were initially supposed to be looking at. I think how it's gotten off into the commercial property registration is a good thing, but when I was really surprised when I read this, and then it took our residential registration that needed a lot of updating, but could be maybe the basis for what the council member had asked, which I thought was brilliant, but it just said, well, we're just going to gut and replace it and only do commercial. I'm thinking, well, that's not really what was asked. Am I off base, council member?
You are absolutely right on. The main idea behind all this was to make sure that any single-family home that was vacant, that would be protected just in case vagrants or squatters would actually occupy the property without actually having a valid lease. That was one of the concerns that is happening throughout the United States. And we want to make sure that if it happens here, we do protect the property owners. And of course, adding the commercial properties to this will be great, but definitely we want to make sure that we protect the single-family home residents, because there's a lot of part-time residents that live here and they do not occupy their property for 5-6 months out of the year, and squatters can easily go in and do this. Therefore, if they actually register that property as being vacant, we can do exactly what Councilmember Gregory mentioned.
Okay, I apologize. This is not directed to residential, nor is the Palm Springs ordinance directed to seasonal occupancy of homes, and I'm not prepared today to talk about how law enforcement would handle a situation like that. But certainly that is feedback that we can take back to look at how we could tailor or make changes to this. If we wanted to expand this to include residential, I think we'd need to conduct some additional discussions on just how we would enforce I would say what has been interpreted to be a civil matter with the squatter. But I can continue with the presentation if you'd like, or we can end it here and we can go back and
Well, from what Councilmember Gregory and Councilmember Gutierrez have brought up, I don't know if this hits the meat where you wanted to be. So,
Well, I think you could go through the presentation, but I think the council's already giving direction as, well, it missed a little bit, and we don't want residential to be taken out. In fact, we want residential to be reviewed and strengthened. So I think you can continue to talk about the commercial piece, just realizing that if it does come back to us, it's going to need to be.
I realize we're at 4:30, and I want to be respectful of the council's time.
well, I would prefer coming back with everything in one package than moving forward on this right now. Would that be okay with you, Charlie, or what's your thoughts?
Yeah,
Because this already served a useful purpose, because we learned a piece that needs to be part of it, and so now we can incorporate that. The part that's already been presented in the staff report about the commercial probably can stand mostly the way it is, and then we can add to it the residential piece, and then we'll have a comprehensive package for you. And
it sounds good. If I could, Mr. Mayor. So when it comes back, one thing that even got really kind of asked is how many days, 10 days, 30 days. And so I don't necessarily have a judgment call on that. I think 30 days, and it would be how do you know? I don't think that really got answered, but because what happens is usually somebody says or somebody notices or that kind of thing, and they'll say, well, it's been vacant, and then they go back and look, well, how long has it been vacant? And if there's some evidence that it's been vacant more than 30 days, now you have some action. But I think that's very important with residents, because we have residents that appear to be, nobody's registered, nobody knows what happened, and they appear to be vacant for some period of time. And issues are developing, but aren't necessarily to the point where code can act. And when code can act, we've already seen they can't act very quickly. So I think that's what we were looking for partially in this, is there's something that can say, hey, if this is vacant, you need to register it as vacant. We need to have contact information, go through whatever you have to do that. But it should include residences. And then, of course, the whole other piece that is kind of a new, we realize that it's new, would be, well, how do we deal with squatters then that have moved in to these residential, or technically commercial, but it's usually residential, and are saying that they've leased it, and how that would be an advantage for the property owner to say, hey, I'm renovating this property, and so I'm going to list it on some kind of a registry for 6 months, that it's not going to be rented. In some cities, that's what we're supposed to be, we had asked for research on. Some cities have some kind of registration where then that can be used as evidence of, no, this is not to be rented at this point. We have contact information now with the owner, and have you leased it? Well, they haven't leased it, and it's registered as being vacant. So, yeah, I think it needs to include all those components when it comes back.
Thank you.
Okay. Anyone? Councilmember Lamb.
And this is not a question for Andy necessarily, it's just kind of out there in the ether, but you showed that picture of the Family Dollar store. So on the southeast corner of Victoria and Dade Palm, there's that empty lot that was decided on by the council to approve a gas station. However, the gas station hasn't happened, and the lot is a mess. I mean, there's palm fronds and stuff, and the city has, invested lots in redoing Date Palm and the streets and storm drains and ADA ramps and street sweeping. And so I imagine that's just a code enforcement. I could bring it to, okay, that's all.
And that
All
was
right.
owned by, at least when we were talking about making it a gas station, that's owned by Food for Less.
Oh, food, yeah, right.
That corner
Right,
is.
okay, thank you.
Thank you, Andy. Appreciate it. Danny, do you have anything to speak on this? Or the thousands of people watching? Okay, thanks. All right, we're going to close for a closed session. Would the city attorney please read closed session items?
I would be happy to. I'm going to need the help of the city manager or the assistant city manager because I note that the conference or the real property negotiator doesn't specify the address or location of the property or the parties involved.
All right, thank you. We'll close for closed session.
So the parties, we need to say that. So the location is,
I'm having trouble hearing you, Eric.
Oh, I'm sorry about that. It's for some reason, the description doesn't identify the property.
Yeah, it's not on the, I'm sorry, it was not on the agenda, it's in the pages, though, so I don't know if that suffices, that's part of the agenda.
But we still need to identify it publicly.
I have the APNs, is that sufficient, or the
Yeah,
APN numbers?
is fine.
So in the staff report included in this item, this is in regards to approximately 5.94 acres. The APNs are 678-030-061, 678-030-063, 678-030-065, 678-030-067, 678-030-069, and 678-060-059.
And I'll just note that the negotiating parties would be City of Cathedral City and Pacific West companies. Thank you. With that, we can recess into closed session.
Thank you very much.